Another Uber story by u/Qcumatz. This happened back in 2019 when I was living in a small town in western Massachusetts. I had bought concert tickets, which included a meet and greet for one of my favorite metal bands. They were performing at the Palladium on a September afternoon, and I worked in a town 45 minutes away from where the concert was happening. I had everything arranged for the big day. Unfortunately, my car broke down days prior to the concert, and the renting car place did not have available vehicles for that weekend. Concert pal Jamal was working in Boston that day, and he was going to meet me at the concert instead. Due to the circumstances, I decided to book an Airbnb for Jamal and I to stay for the night. I ended up taking the bus after my shift at the hospital ended. I arrived to the bus terminal and requested an Uber to take me to my Airbnb place, where I was planning to take a nap and change clothes before heading out to the concert. A gray Toyota Corolla that matched the description arrived, and a very young guy greeted me and started the usual conversation. I gave him vague answers, but it was inevitable for him to notice that I was a doctor, as I was still wearing my blue scrubs and Crocs. 10 minutes into the drive, the driver offered to buy me food at Chick-fil-A. I politely refused him, but he ended up going to the drive-thru because it was on the way and bought me a sandwich and soda in spite of my refusal. He started asking me if I was single and the reason why I was visiting the city and if I was traveling alone. I vaguely told him about the concert, avoiding giving much details. But the driver then started talking about how he was driving one of his friends to Boston, and it was a shame that he couldn't take me to the concert place, but that he can drive me back to my Airbnb after the show ended for free. I didn't say anything. I was too distracted looking for the instructions on how to access the Airbnb that I missed the driver saving my phone number in his phone. After the concert, Jamal went to the parking lot to retrieve the car. In the meantime, I continued chatting with some girls that I befriended until I received a call from an unknown number. I ignored it and I continued talking. My phone kept ringing and I answered, thinking maybe it was someone from the hospital because I did not have my work phone with me. After the 5th time, I picked up and I recognized the voice of the Uber driver, who was inviting me to a friend's party and that he was on his way to pick me up. My gut feeling was telling me how fishy the situation was, and I firmly said no, and then hung up. 2 minutes later, the Uber driver texted to let me know that he was 5 minutes away and that I needed to wait for him. I paled after reading the text, and one of the girls noticed how nervous I was getting. Telling her my situation and showing her the text, she and her boyfriend decided to keep me company until my friend's car appeared in the corner. Saturday morning came by, and during breakfast and while chatting about the concert, Jamal mentioned that Jason, one of the guys we met at the concert, sent him a Facebook message asking if we were okay. It seems that after we left, a group of 4 men in a gray car approached them asking about me. They decided to play dumb, telling them that they haven't seen anybody with my characteristics, and walked away. We reported him to Uber and then deleted the app. I kept receiving random calls from unknown numbers at odd hours in the night. I decided to change my phone number and avoid unnecessary trouble. And since that day, no more Uber for me. fake Uber driver tried to pick up my boyfriend and I by u/alien_Bob. In Myrtle Beach in 2016, my boyfriend and I had ordered an Uber from our hotel to the restaurant. When you get an Uber, the type of car, a picture of the driver, and their name are usually visible on the app. We were waiting on an older gentleman driving a little white sedan to come get us when a dumpy-looking van pulls up. There was a man behind the wheel and a man in the passenger seat and two in the back. One of the men in the back slid the van door open and asked, "Are you?" while saying my boyfriend's name. And as soon as we saw how many people were in the van and that none of them were the picture of the man on the app, we immediately knew something was off. First off, Uber has a rule where you can't have non-customer passengers in the car with you when making pickups. And second, the whole situation just felt fishy to both of us because nothing matched what the app said. My boyfriend lied and said that we were not the ones that called an Uber, and they slammed the door and drove off. A few minutes later, our actual Uber driver pulled up. We told him what had happened, and he said that it wasn't the first time that he heard stories from customers like that. And I have never forgotten that and wonder what would have happened had we gotten into that van that day. We have also never figured out on how they knew my boyfriend's name, unless they had hacked into Uber's database somehow to access current Uber requests. If anyone has any other ideas about how he would know his name, please let me know. But the moral of the story is, always be cautious if your Uber driver shows up and the car or driver do not match what the app says. He Wasn't My Uber Driver by u/Scriptonite. This happened to me a few years ago. It was New Year's Eve, and I had just been out in the city to celebrate with 3 of my closest girlfriends. At the end of the evening, when we were all exhausted and ready for bed, one of our friends traveled to her house near the club, while the others made the hour-long trek back to our home suburb. There were 3 of us together and all females. The trip to our suburb typically involved a 45-minute-long bus trip and then an Uber or taxi to our houses. I have lived in that area my entire life, and I am very familiar with the most convenient way to get to and from my house. On this particular evening, we got off the bus and I booked an Uber with my phone. It was around 4 a.m., so you can imagine our remote town had very little road traffic at this time. A car pulls up at the bus stop, and as this was the first car we had seen since arriving, and no one else was around except us, we assumed it was our ride and got in. Our Uber driver was a Russian man with a very thick accent, although he didn't speak a lot. Immediately, I noticed that he was taking us the wrong direction of my house, but I figured it's fine. Sometimes, GPS takes drivers on different routes, and I brushed off the thought of it. Then, 10 minutes later, I get a text that my Uber driver is arriving at my pickup destination. I look at the driver beside me, angry that I was too tired or intoxicated to remember the text message you receive before your ride pulls up, but also terrified that I may have gotten my 2 best friends and myself into a vehicle with a man we didn't know at all. My actual Uber driver then tried to call me, presumably to find out where we were, but I ignored the call, not wanting to alert the man who had actually picked us up. At that point, I still hadn't said anything to my best friends, but I asked the driver if he will stop at a service station so I can grab a drink of water before we continue the journey, because I felt sick. He questioned me. "We aren't far from your destination now." But I insisted, so he agreed. When we arrived at the service station, I asked my friends to get out with me desperately, and they obliged. I explained the situation to them, and we all agreed to tell the driver that we were going to walk to a friend's house nearby and not to worry about the rest of the trip. He seemed frustrated and insisted that he'd take us, but we refused to get back in the car. We ended up getting a cab back home from there. So, Uber driver, who may not have actually been an Uber driver, let's not meet. The Stalker Uber Driver by U/Ether08. This happened a couple of months ago, December of last year. I started working a new job in the mall and had to work for most of Boxing Day. I was done at 10 p.m. and transit seemed to have ended at 7 p.m. I'm a student who didn't go home for the holidays due to this job and never had to deal with holiday transit hours. I decided to call an Uber, and the driver picked me up right in front of the mall. We had a casual conversation during the drive back, and he learned about where I worked and how I'm living on my own for the time being since my roommates went to their hometowns. Fast forward to the next day at work at around 6 p.m. This driver walks into the store and tries to strike a conversation with me. But I told him that I had to get back to work. He also asked if we could hang out later, to which I said no, and then he left. At the end of that shift, around 10 p.m., I walked out of the store planning to take transit, and as soon as I stepped out of the store, the driver immediately pulled up next to me and offered to give me a free ride back home. After going back and forth with me declining and him saying that it's free, I decided to walk away and caught a bus home. I was pretty overwhelmed by the fact that he showed up to my workplace and waited 3 hours until I was done work to offer me a ride home. I've reported this to Uber, and they've notified me that they have suspended this driver. They provided me a full refund and gave me a link to provide to the police if I plan on filing a report. Silly of me to give away information like that to a stranger, but I hope to never meet that driver again, who appeared twice my age, knows where I work and live, and this is a lesson learned 110%. Think twice about ordering Uber pools by U/Jaded Monk. This just occurred this past November. A close friend and I were on fall break from college and decided to go to an Odessa concert in downtown Chicago. We grew up in the suburbs, so going to Chicago to have fun was common for us. Anyways, we had a great time at the concert and decided to Uber home since we weren't close to the train station. My friend told me Uber wasn't working for him at that moment, so I called the Uber. But this was literally my first time ever calling one, and I accidentally called an Uber pool, not knowing what it was. My friend saw that and was like, it doesn't really matter. So, the driver picks us up from right outside the concert venue. There were a lot of intoxicated people around, as one could imagine post-Odessa's show. But we were pretty sober, as all we did was smoke some weed, which we were used to. We get in the car and everything is going normal, but we didn't notice the direction the driver was taking us as we were warped in talking about the show. Turns out, the driver was going to the south side of Chicago, which we realized after some time by looking at maps. But our suburb was exactly the opposite direction of this lengthy drive south. We decided to attribute this to the fact that it was an Uber pool, and then shrugged it off, until we picked up this next passenger. To be honest, this girl scared us. I don't like to judge people, but she scared us just by looks and how she talked. Once the girl got on, we asked the driver if we were going first, to which he stopped answering. Next thing I know, my phone lit up and said that the Uber trip was cancelled. And for this duration of the ride, Uber had no record of me being in the car. I asked the driver what the deal was, and he didn't answer. The girl and the driver 100% knew each other as they were calling each other nicknames. The girl was being weird and seemed to be doing some hand signals to him. Then we proceeded to drive further south to this neighborhood, the sketchiest neighborhood that I have ever seen. I didn't realize neighborhoods like this even existed. Every house was completely wrecked, and there were no street signs on most streets, and most street lights were out flickering. Homeless people lying on sidewalks, and there were beat-down warehouses and alleys. This was by far the scariest area that I've ever seen. No one who cared would hear a scream in this area. Once we started seeing all of this, our hearts dropped because the driver would still not respond to us. My friend then looked over to me and whispers, "We need to get the hell out of here." To which I replied, "Dude, look where we are." And so we stayed in the car. We then get driven down this alley behind a warehouse where the streets ended and there were just fields beyond it. The driver is going down this alley at like 2 meters per hour, but keeps going. The girl and Uber driver were clearly discussing something serious, but we couldn't make out since they were using mostly signals. And at that time, our hearts sank even more, and we literally both thought that we were going to be killed in this alley, or at best, someone was going to get in the car and rob us. He stopped. The doors unlocked, and I was in complete shock with a pale face when all of a sudden my friend says, "Hey, I'm completely sober, and I'm about to call 911. I'm assuming the driver was waiting around the concert to pick up some wasted people to allow this to happen, but we were pretty sober. Which he was serious about. He had 911 dialed up on his phone, and the Uber driver looks back at us in shock after he sees 911 dialed and my friend's finger about to push call. He looks at the girl and the girl is in shock too, and she nods her head no and says, "What the hell, right?" Which was the driver's nickname, and then gets out of the car. The driver then drives out of the neighborhood and onto the highway towards our suburb. All of a sudden, my Uber app gave me a notification saying that we were now in a ride. All of a sudden, the driver starts talking to us again, but he wasn't giving any answers, just saying that he is driving us home. We were asking what the hell just happened, and he wouldn't answer stuff like that. He would answer about where we were going, but nothing about what just happened. We got home safely and reported the Uber driver for this ride because it was obviously messed up. We think that the Uber driver was trying to wait for wasted people to call a pool so he could get away with this, but realized that we were too big of a risk when it came to do what they were going to do. We've accepted that we were part of a mugging scheme and got lucky when we decided not to get drunk at that concert. We had anxiety for weeks after this, but we now know just how sketchy some areas can be and how to be more safe in Chicago. Of course, by not calling an Uber pool outside a concert or bar. It's so weird to me that people live this sketchy kind of lives and do this to people, but it was eye-opening. So, let's not try ever again, or any Uber pool for that matter. I drive Uber a couple hours a week to earn some extra cash, pay for my insurance and etc. I'm not a big drinker, so it always works out well for me when I go out with friends late at night. I get to go out and hang out for a bit and then earn some extra cash on the return trip home. But one thing to keep in mind is that the Uber app does not tell you where the expected destination of a trip is before you accept it. So, if someone is requesting to be dropped off in an extremely sketchy area, you have no idea until you have already accepted the trip and the person is literally in the backseat of your car. Super shady, and in my opinion, it should be illegal for Uber to do that. But I digress. Number 1. About a month ago, I was driving home in exactly such a scenario. It was around 1 a.m. and I had dropped off a couple people already, when I saw somebody had requested a ride about 5 minutes away. I decided that I would pick up this guy and then head home. Unfortunately, the pickup location of this gentleman was in a not-so-nice part of town. When I pulled up, the guy was not waiting outside, which I was mildly annoyed about. But as I looked around the sketchy apartment complexes, I figured that I couldn't blame him for not wanting to stand around out in the open. Finally, about 5 minutes later and a late fee, the guy finally comes out and hops into the back seat. He was an African-American gentleman that looked to be near my age. "Where are you headed?" I asked him. "Post office," he muttered back to me. This instantly made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Why would somebody be going to the post office at 1 a.m.? To my knowledge, nobody worked the night shift at the post office. I decided to not ask any questions and commence the trip, which was about 10 minutes away. The post office was in the eastern part of my city and situated in a rather desolate part of town. Absolutely nobody other than myself and this guy were still out and about, judging by the look of the streets en route. Finally, I pull up to the drive of the post office, which was tucked into an area located by what appeared to be a large abandoned factory, and I began to get worried. The entire complex was a large cement building with about half a football field of driveway to the factory next door. Even though only the moonlight was the sole source of light for me to see, I could make out the shape of 4 shadowy silhouettes at the end of the drive. It looked like they were standing there, waiting for the passenger in my car. "This is it," I said. "You can drop me off here," he responded, and got out of the car and began walking towards his 4 associates. I have no idea what he was doing that night, but I don't think he was mailing a letter. Number 2. Another Uber experience is I was driving downtown, and this time, I got a call from a young man near my age. I drove to the location and parked my car next to a dilapidated bridge. I didn't see anyone waiting for the Uber, and I waited for a couple seconds until I received a phone call from the guy who ordered the Uber. The Uber, he explained, wasn't for him, but for his friends. I didn't like the sound of that, and something about the situation made me nervous. At times, I might be overly cautious, but I've learned to always trust my gut. "I don't see your friends," I told him. The guy then starts describing them to me. They were 2 shaggy-looking men with big bushy beards, he said. I started scanning around the area, trying to determine if I could see anybody that matched that description, and I didn't see anyone. Nervous, I took my car out of the park and started pulling away from the curb with the idea that it would be best to just leave. Suddenly, as I was driving away, I saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. 2 hobos with long beards and tattered clothes emerged from under the bridge and were walking towards my car. I instantly booked it and then canceled the ride. I realized that it was probably some guy who was trying to help out a couple of homeless people get to where they needed to go. But the situation absolutely seemed off to me, and I have no idea if the guys were on drugs and etc. And I don't regret canceling that ride at all. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.